Hi everyone, welcome to SGX Listing. We will be talking about the markets. First, let's talk about the listing application for Mainboard. Well, in the listing application, obviously you need the basic particulars that include the name, the date and place of incorporation, the brief description of the principal business of the listing company, and details of the securities, for example, the title, the amount, the class, and the par value, the application date, whether or not it's listed in Mainboard or Catalist, the currency of the shares that is offered to the public, and what's the size of the offer, what's the price, what are the methods used, and the underwriting, and whether or not it's listing on other stock exchange. It also requires the prospectus or offering memorandum or introductory document. These are the documents that shows the public or even the MAS what the company is all about. You require a confirmation from the issue manager that tells you that the admission requirements are satisfied and that the documents are ready to be submitted, and if there's any other matters to disclose prior to listing. There's also a declaration that's needed from directors, executive officers, controlling shareholder, or any other related persons that have huge influence on the company. P&L and cash flow projection that is done by the accountants, the subscription invitation that is given to the public, and the admission into official list. So what is the official list? The official list is a list that consists of companies that's admitted to and not removed from SGX. They have official list for SGX ST, official list for SGX Mainboard, and official list for SGX Catalist. These are basically just lists that tells you which are the official companies that are already in the market. Prospectus requirements. Like I mentioned before, the purpose of the prospectus is to inform investing public about the company's business, assets, and the nature of the company. And this must be lodged with MAS before circulation to the public. Because the prospectus shows you about the information on the company's business and the nature of the company, it has to be declared and signed by all directors or proposed directors. And this document is subjected to public comments for about 3 to 4 weeks. The shares must be dated, and the shares must be issued within 6 months from the date of this prospectus that's been lodged with MAS. The prospectus must be accurate. Any misleading or non-disclosure material fact is liable to a prosecution. Now, this is the process timeline of listing in either the Mainboard or the Catalist. In the Mainboard, there's a pre-submission consultation, and it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for SGX and MAS to review the documents. And when the documents are finally lodged on a public platform which is called Opera for 2 weeks, and in 1 or 2 weeks after that it will be launched and trading can commence. For Catalyst, there's a need for a notification to SGX. Most of the documentation are done by the sponsors, and as long as the sponsors are okay, they can list on SGX. We will cover this more on Catalyst later, and there will be a lodgement as well, but this is on Cataloged. Registration and launch, and trading can commence. Opera actually means offers and prospectuses electronic repository and access. This is an e-platform for the lodgement of documents to MAS. Similarly, Catalog is an SGX website for companies to lodge their information in Catalist. Listing requirements carry on. There is this quantitative criteria that a company needs to satisfy before they are able to be listed. These are the 3 criteria, but they only need to satisfy just one of them. The first one is the consolidated pre-tax profit of more than 30 million, right? For the latest financials, but this must have operating track record of more than 3 years. Profitable in the latest financial year, and has a market capitalization of 150 million or more. And also it requires operating track record of more than 3 years as well. Or operating revenue in the latest completed financial year and a market capitalization of 300 million. It means both the operating revenue and the market capitalization must be more than 300 million and with an operating track record of more than 1 year. Note that REITs and business trusts that meet the market cap of 300 million but do not have the historical financial information has to demonstrate there's a need to demonstrate that they can generate operating revenue immediately upon listing before they are able to list on SGX. What is the definition of market capitalization? It is also known as the market value and is simply a simple formula of share price times the number of shares that is outstanding in the market. There's a shareholding spread that is required to be satisfied by the listing companies. Shareholder spread basically just means how much public float there are. And public float actually means what shares that is held by the public. And for market cap that is less than 300 million, 25%. Between 300 and 400 million, 20% must be held by the public hands. 400 to 1 billion, 15%. And for market cap more than 1 billion, 12% must be held by the public. And the number of shareholders must be more than 500. And under secondary listing, you must have more than 500 shareholders worldwide. And where primary home exchange do not have the established framework and arrangement to facilitate movement of shares between jurisdictions, well, you must have more than 500 shareholders in Singapore and more than 1,000 shareholders worldwide. There's a profit test with respect to the profit criterion that is mentioned in section 2.4.1 just now. So in this test, issuer must have engaged substantially in the same business and under the same management throughout the 3 years of operating track record. And if issuer has made low profits or losses in the 2 years before this application due to specific factor which is proved to be temporary, well, such factors should be seized and expected to rectify upon listing. You must give proof that you are able to rectify the temporary factors that cause the low profits or losses, and this could be very specific to the company. Exceptional and non-recurrent income extraordinary are excluded from the calculation of the profit test. The financial and position and liquidity of the company must be in a healthy financial position. All debts to the company by the directors, substantial shareholders, and companies that's controlled by the directors or substantial shareholders must be settled prior to listing. When it says debts, these are debts that is owed by the directors to the company. The directors and management of the companies should have appropriate experience and expertise to manage the business. This test is very similar to the fit and proper criteria that we mentioned in previous topics on the criteria that you need to become a stockbroker or have a license to trade. It's the same thing. Okay, we require directors and executive officers to have this reputation, good reputation. Character, integrity of directors, like I mentioned. And there should be more than 2 independent, non-executive directors. There's something called chain listing. Chain listing is basically listing of a subsidiary and the parent company has already listed in SGX. So it means that the parent and the subsidiary is both listed. And this usually is not allowed unless the operation and assets and the business is different. And SGX will then consider for listing for this subsidiary if the parent is listed. Well, we have to talk about life science companies here because life science company is more unique. A life science company cannot fulfill the criterion, may be still able to list if it fulfills these following conditions. successfully raise funds from institution and credit investors more than 6 months prior to listing application. It must show that their research is so valuable that they already raised funds before. And they also meet the 300 million market cap requirement. They are going to use the IPO proceeds that they get from the listing to bring identified product to commercialization as its primary reason for listing. It has to demonstrate more than 3-year R&D operational track record, and the available working capital is sufficient for present requirement and for more than or equal to 18 months after listing. So for such companies, the continuing listing obligation include providing quarterly financial updates with the future funds projection. This is to make sure that the life science companies are getting funds for research only. Now, all companies are subject to continuing listing obligations, and this is found in Chapter 7 of the SGX Rulebook, and it applies to all primary listing companies. For secondary listing, remember, they do not need to comply. However, they need to release all information and documents to SGX at the same time as it released to the home exchange. This means that the primary exchange that they are in, where they are supposed to release information and documentation for their continuing listing, it should do the same to its secondary listing as well. These are the listing fees. Initial listing fee is 100K. Annual listing fee will be 35K. Quite profitable for SGX, yeah. And the variable rate is $100, or rather per 1 million of market cap. Sorry, this is 100K. And obviously the maximum is 200K. And this is $30 per, 30K per 1 million of market cap, and a maximum of 150K. There is also a processing fee that range between 3K to 8K depending on the complexity of the listing. There is something called a moratorium. A moratorium is basically a temporary prohibition of an activity. This is the definition, but how does it apply to listing in SGX? There's something called period of moratorium. Promoters, there's a definition for promoters. These promoters are executive directors that holds more than 5% of the shares, or if you are controlling shareholders at the time of listing. They must observe a period of moratorium on the transfer or disposal of securities. It means that if they are listed, the people holding on to the shares must not sell or buy the securities in this period. This is to maintain promoters' commitment to the company when it's listed. For example, in the case where issuer satisfies profitability tests, you must hold shareholdings for more than 6 months after listing. This 6 months is what they call a period of moratorium. And where the case of issuer satisfies market cap test, it must hold shareholders for more than 6 months of listing. And after the next 6 months, you must hold more than 50%. It means that after 6 months, the maximum that you can dispose of the securities is 50%. In the case of investor each with more than 5% of post-invitation issued share capital, the proportion of their shareholder is to be held more than 6 months after listing, based on a formula that is found in the rule book. This formula is not here. What are other listing information that's needed? Listing applicants have to address issues related to conflict of interest, quality and integrity of management, amongst others. These are the things that they have disclosed, if there are, before they list. Issuer can reserve up to 10%, 25% for Catalist of shares allotment to employees, customers, etc. That means they can give shares to their own employees and their customer as a sweetener. Now let's move on to SGX Catalist. SGX Catalist, as per introduction, is actually for SME companies that is fast growing. They are actually renamed from SysDeck on 17 December 2007. What are sponsors? Sponsors are qualified professional companies that is authorized and regulated by SGX, who are experienced in corporate finance and compliance advisory work. Well, examples of sponsors are UOB Kay Hian, KGI Frasers, Securities Private Limited, etc. While these sponsors are required to determine the suitability of company for the listing without the need for SGX review. Sponsor also directly supervise Catalist companies, while SGX retains the power to discipline them. This is exactly the point where we made earlier on, where we say that it's exchange regulated, but is supervised by sponsors. Sponsors are subject to admission and continuing obligations as well. That's why SGX hold the responsibility on the sponsors to be able to pick up good SMEs and fast-growing companies to be listed on Catalist. So all Catalist companies must retain a sponsor for as long as they are listed. If they are promoted to the main board, obviously they will not need the sponsor anymore. But as long as they are in Catalist, they need to have the sponsor. What are the listing requirements? There are no quantitative criteria. It's all up to the sponsors to determine the suitability of the listing. What is the shareholder spread? Well, at IPO, there must be more than 200 shareholders and more than 15% of post-invitation share capital, or 500K worth of shares, whichever higher, must be in public hands. What are the continuing listing obligations? These rules relating to disclosure of material information, periodic reporting, additional share issuance, and corporate transaction, etc. applies. They have to retain a sponsor, like mentioned before. Well, I've mentioned about this as well. Catalist companies has a chance to be promoted to the main board, and the requirement for them to do that is they must at least be listed on Catalist for 2 years. And to be able to promote the main board, they must be able to satisfy the main board requirements, which is the quantitative requirements as well as the shareholding spread requirement. Well, this is the end of the SGX markets. Thank you.